In 1986, the famous air combat movie, Top Gun, was released. In the movie, Tom Cruise starred as Maverick, flying an F-14 Tomcat fighter against MiG fighters. In the real world, the Top Gun battle took place in Gulf of Sidra near Libya. This is Gulf of Sidra incident in 1981. On August 31, 1969, Muammar Gaddafi staged a coup and became the ruler of Libya. Gaddafi adopts pro-Soviet, confront U.S. strategy. In 1970, Gaddafi expelled the U.S. military presence in Libya, and in 1972, he abrogated all cooperation agreements with the U.S. and downgraded diplomatic relations. In 1973, because of Yom Kippur War, Gaddafi decided to adopt a more radical strategy to gain more influence in the Middle East, and he declared that Gulf of Sidra belonged to Libya, and prohibited all foreign aircraft and ships from entering. The United States did not endorse this decision by Gaddafi, and the U.S. Navy launched Operation Freedom of Navigation here, and sent reconnaissance aircraft into Gulf of Sidra on several occasions. Gaddafi ordered his Air Force to expel U.S. aircraft, and Libyan fighter jets twice fired on U.S. reconnaissance aircraft that entered the area. And when Ronald Reagan was elected President of the United States, President Reagan decided to adopt a more offensive strategy to restore freedom of navigation in Gulf of Sidra. He ordered the U.S. Navy to conduct exercises in Gulf of Sidra and established more aggressive rules of engagement. When the president was asked how far an American pilot can pursue hostile aircraft and fire upon, he replied, "Chase them all the way to their hangars." In August 1981, the U.S. Navy's 6th Fleet, a carrier strike group with the carriers USS Forrestal and USS Nimitz at its core, came to Gulf of Sidra to conduct the exercise. On the first day of the exercise, August 18th, the Libyans sent their large number of fighters in multiple waves, in different directions, to close in on the U.S. fleet. The F-14 fighter pilot, Lieutenant Lawrence Musinski, call sign Music, flying his Tomcat Fast Eagle 107, along with his lead aircraft Fast Eagle 102, was tasked to intercept 2 Libyan MiG-25s approaching from the south. Supported by electronic jamming from U.S. Navy EA-6B Prowlers and EP-3 Orions, Lieutenant Musinski and his lead aircraft successfully evaded the Fox Bats radar and circled behind the MiG-25s. Musinski accelerated his Tomcat, allowing the F-14 to suddenly appear next to those Fox Bats. His radar intercept officer, Luca Anderson, gave the middle finger to the surprised Libyan and then took a picture of the Libyan pilot. This scene was used in the movie Top Gun. Although the Libyans flew 70 sorties in an attempt to threaten the U.S. fleet, the U.S. Navy used their powerful airborne early warning and control capabilities, electronic jamming capabilities, and the combat power of F-14 fighters, which were a generation ahead of Libyan aircraft, to intercept and force all Libyan aircraft away from the U.S. fleet. Musinski said, "It was fun and games on the 18th, and although the Libyan Air Force showed considerable aggressiveness, the Libyan pilots did not cross the red line. So at the time, the U.S. pilots assumed that the interception game would continue for the next few days." In the early morning of August 19th, Fast Eagle 102 and Fast Eagle 107, 2 Tomcat fighters belonging to VF-41 Black Ace, took off again on a combat air patrol mission. Deep in Gulf of Sidra, near Libya's 12 nautical miles of territorial waters, a U.S. Navy S-3A anti-submarine aircraft was on a reconnaissance mission. Viking's mission was to test the Libyan Air Force's response. The Libyans felt the U.S. aircraft had crossed the limit of what they could tolerate. and took off two Su-22 fighters to expel the S-3A. The U.S. Navy's E-2 Hawkeye soon spotted the Libyan fighters, but because the two Su-22s flew so close together, the radar of E-2 identified them as one aircraft. Because the Libyan fighters had fired on U.S. aircraft in the past, the S-3A were ordered to flee quickly, while Fast Eagle 102 and Fast Eagle 107 were ordered to intercept the Libyan fighters. By this time, the two Tomcat fighters had been patrolling the air for over an hour. Before the U.S. Navy fighters arrived, the S-3A was in a very precarious position, because Viking was very slow and had no countermeasures against the Libyan fighters, not even a radar warning receiver. The S-3A pilot lowered his altitude to 500 feet, hoping that the radar reflection clutter from the sea would help him evade the Su-22s. Musinski flew Fast Eagle 107 and his lead aircraft, Fast Eagle 102, flown by CDR Kleeman, call sign Hank, quickly to their designated airspace. The two F-14s were arranged in loose-deuce formation, with Musinski at 4,000 feet above Hank Kleeman, and the two aircraft 2 miles apart. The Libyan fighters also appeared to spot the approaching F-14s, and they turned around and flew head-on toward the Tomcats. Soon, the two sides came into visual range, and the U.S. Navy pilots were surprised to find that there were two Libyan Su-22s and not one, as Hawkeye had said. The two sides approached quickly, and suddenly the lead Su-22 fired an AA-2 Atoll missile at Hank Kleeman. The Libyans fired suddenly, startling the U.S. pilots, who had expected to experience the same cat-and-mouse game they had yesterday. But the Libyan pilot undoubtedly made a bad decision, as the AA-2 Atoll is an infrared-guided air-to-air missile that is difficult to target with a head-on launch. Not to mention that the two sides were too close together, so Kleeman easily dodged the missile. Kleeman ordered Musinski to take on the Libyan lead fighter, the guy who fired the missiles, while he went to catch the other one. The F-14 was much more maneuverable than the Su-22, so Kleeman's Tomcat quickly circled behind the Libyan wingman, who was flying toward the sun, hoping that the sunlight would interfere with the American pilot's vision and make it difficult for the infrared-guided air-to-air missile to lock onto him. Kleeman was patient. He followed behind the Libyan for over 10 seconds, waited for the Su-22 to start running out of energy, and veer away from the sun, locked onto it, and fired an AIM-9L Sidewinder missile, which easily hit the fiery tail of the Su-22, leaving the Libyan pilot no choice but to eject. And Musinski's Fast Eagle 107 also caught the Libyan lead aircraft, but Musinski's Tomcat had some problems. He carried two Sidewinder missiles. One malfunctioned and could not be fired, and his radar was also faulty, so his gun could not target the enemy aircraft either. In other words, he only has one chance to attack. So Musinski carefully got his Sidewinder missile on target and fired it out. The Libyan plane made a frantic turn to try to get out of being shot down, but the fates did not help him, and the Su-22 was hit as well, leaving the unlucky Libyan pilot to eject. The entire engagement lasted only 3 minutes and 44 seconds. During the rest of the exercise, the Libyan Air Force continued to send fighters to harass the U.S. fleet, but they did not fire again. In this air battle, the U.S. Navy shot down enemy aircraft for the first time in air combat since the Vietnam War. The U.S. Navy's F-14 fighter was the world's first fourth-generation fighter in service, so it was no surprise that it shot down the Su-22, which lagged behind it. And the F-14 fighter has few records of shooting down enemy aircraft in its long U.S. Navy service. This is far less than the number of enemy aircraft shot down by their Persian Cat counterparts serving in the Iranian Air Force. And with the retirement of the Tomcat in the U.S. Navy in 2006, and the Americans themselves destroying most of the retired Tomcats, the air battles that military buffs expected to see between the U.S. Navy Tomcat and the Iranian Air Force Persian Cat will never happen. But CDR Kleeman's Fast Eagle 102, which survived the Tomcat massacre, is now on display at the Commemorative Air Force Museum in Midland, Texas.